Welcome to this latest devotional from Holy Trinity Leicester, and we're going to be thinking today about the question of doubt and how we deal with our doubts in the current season. Now, often doubt in the Christian faith is considered quite a dirty word, almost, that actually it shouldn't have a place in the victorious Christian life, that the Spirit-empowered, gospel-believing Christian shouldn't have any doubts. But the witness of Scripture, the witness of so many who have followed Jesus over the years, is that is very much not true. That doubt is part of the discipleship call that we have sometimes. And I'm aware, especially in this season, doubt may arise, may be amplified, and may be hard to deal with. So I want us to think about how we deal with doubt in our lives, especially doubt in the things of the Christian faith. We're going to root some thoughts in the Gospel of Matthew, the 11th chapter, starting at verse 2. It's a story of John the Baptist, who has been locked up in prison by King Herod, and he sends messengers to find out what Jesus says to him about who he is. Starting at verse 2, it says this: Now when John heard in prison about the deeds of the Christ, he sent word by his disciples and said to him, Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another? And Jesus answered them, Go and tell John what you see and hear. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. And the dead are raised up, and the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me. In that passage, John the Baptist has doubts, and that is astounding, especially considering who he is. He has doubts as to who Jesus is, but from even before his birth, he was the one that had been prophesied would be the one that would point towards Jesus. We know that he leapt in his mother's womb, in Elizabeth's womb, when the mother of Jesus approached, identifying who Jesus is, that he was there at the baptism of Jesus, when he saw heaven open and the Spirit descending upon Jesus like a dove, and remembered the promise of God that this is what would identify the true Messiah. He was the one that when the earliest disciples started following Jesus, his own disciples started to turn to follow Jesus as well. And he didn't stop them. In fact, he pointed them to Jesus and said, He must increase and I must decrease. And so when he has doubts here as to who Jesus is, and when he sends messengers to find out if he really is the Messiah, that speaks volumes to us. No doubt the circumstance led to a season of doubt in his life. He had been locked up by King Herod in his own personal lockdown, and he'd been left dejected. He probably started to doubt what he'd said in the past. He probably started to question, is this person who I've spent my life pointing towards really the Messiah? He knew the story of other false messiahs that had arisen in those years previous to Jesus coming, and perhaps start to think, maybe I got it wrong. Maybe this Jesus isn't who I thought he was, who I pointed him out to be. I've got to find out. And so he sends messengers to Jesus and says, Who are you? Who are you? Tell me again who you are. And Jesus replies in a remarkable way. He doesn't tell him off, rebuke him for not believing and trusting, nor does he give a stony silence and not answer the question. Instead, he sends the messengers back to John the Baptist in great compassion says, The things that the Messiah is supposed to be doing, I've been doing. I've been healing the lame, opening the eyes of the blind, that lives are being transformed, and that I bring blessing to those that receive me. I really am the person you thought I was, John, and you can trust in that. And I think it's really important for us to learn from that passage how to deal with doubt. See, John the Baptist knew that in his own doubts, he was able to ask Jesus to send messengers to find out and to be reassured. He had that confidence of relationship. And for us in our own personal lockdown situations, often doubts can be amplified. They can arise when previously there haven't been. Doubts about God's power, his faithfulness, his sovereign plan of what he's doing at this very moment. And our response ought to be the same. to be able to ask Jesus to bring about reassurance and encouragement. We may feel sometimes that that is a sub-Christian thing to be doing, but the witness of so many great Christian followers of Jesus in the past has been that this is part and parcel of the Christian life at times. It's really interesting that after Mother Teresa died, who really was one of the greatest Christians of the last 2 centuries, I would say, that her letters, her journals were published posthumously, and there was a revelation in them that took a number of people by surprise, and it was that for the last 50 years of her life, the majority of her life, she had wrestled with doubts about God's love for her and his presence with her. That all apart from one singular occasion she talks about, she'd wrestled time and time again with what was the truth about who God was to her. And the same is true for many others who have followed Jesus over the centuries. It's part of the Christian life they witness. C.S. Lewis, that great Christian leader of the 60s and 70s, a real intellectual leader who wrote defensively and provocatively about the Christian faith in a way that won people for Christ, recalls that after losing his wife of 3 years, that he felt that God had absolutely abandoned him. And he said when he approached God, it felt like the door was closed and then bolted, and then double bolted, and then all that remained was silence, and he was left doubting God's goodness. We know Jesus on the cross cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That in that moment of great affliction, there was a doubt that arose that he had to address to the Father about why this is going on, why he was doing what he was doing, why he was suffering as he suffered. You see, doubt is part of faith. We see in part at the moment. There is a tension between us fully understanding and knowing it in the future, which is glimpsed and tasted in the present, and the tension between that and our unknowing and our uncertainty. Let no one deceive you by saying that doubt has no place in the Christian faith. It is part of it. What's more important is how we deal with our doubts, that we ask Jesus, that we cry out to him to help us in them, just like the psalmist does, being honest with God about them. And then we have the assurance that Jesus doesn't meet that with a stony silence. He doesn't send a rebuke in response. In fact, he shows great compassion and tenderness in meeting us in our need. The Bible says that a bruised reed he will not break, a smouldering wick he will not snuff out. And maybe for you, if you feel that you're in a place at the moment of doubt, or you know that you are often prone to that season, can I encourage you that you can come to Jesus and ask him. You can simply be honest with him, allow him to minister to those doubts and to bring the comfort and reassurance that all of us from time to time need. Well, thanks so much for listening.